A killer mom, a grieving wreck, a social pariah. My purpose had been hollowed out, leaving nothing but a shell filled with guilt. I looked down at the churning, dark water below. It didn't look peaceful. It looked like an ending. The railing was cold. Of course it was cold. It was November, and a miserable, spitting rain was doing its best to seep into my bones. Appropriate, really. A year to the day. A year since my life had ended right here on this very bridge. I gripped the worn blue plastic in my hand, the smooth, chipped head of a stegosaurus, Leo's favorite, the last thing I ever bought him. My mind, a traitorous movie projector, flickered back to the crash. Not the way I wanted to remember it, but the way it was served to me by others. The screech of tires on wet asphalt, the sickening lurch, and the impossible slow-motion tilt of the world. The sound of 1,000 wine glasses shattering in my ears. Then, the silence. A deep, profound, terrifying silence where a little boy's chatter used to be. I remembered the faces, the condescending pity in the eyes of the first responders, their gazes lingering on me just a second too long. My husband, Julian, arriving at the hospital, his face a perfect mask of grief, but his hands offering a comfort that was as cold as this bridge railing. He held me, but it felt like holding a statue. And Chloe, my best friend, my rock, her grief was the opposite, a grand theatrical performance. Sobs that racked her whole body, screams that echoed down the sterile hallways. At the time, I'd clung to her drama. Now, a year later, it just seemed loud. The media had a field day, of course. Reckless mother, tragic end. It was so easy. Julian had carefully curated the narrative for our families, whispering about my pre-existing instability, my distracted nature, and they'd lapped it up. It was easier to blame the fragile, emotional woman than to accept the random, cruel chaos of the universe. So here I was, a killer mom, a grieving wreck, a social pariah. My purpose had been hollowed out, leaving nothing but a shell filled with guilt. I looked down at the churning, dark water below. It didn't look peaceful. It looked like an ending. My last thought wasn't of Leo's smile or the life we should have had. It was a single, burning, useless question that had haunted me for a year. Julian was supposed to leave work early, ride with us to my mother's. A last-minute meeting, he'd said. Why wasn't he in the car? I let go of the railing. The fall wasn't a fall. There was no rush of air, no stomach-lurching plummet. Instead, the world dissolved into a blinding, painful white light. It wasn't heavenly. It was violent. A tearing, shredding sensation, like my entire being was being pulled backward through a keyhole. I gasped, my lungs burning, and shot up. Not in the water, not in a hospital, in my own bed. Sunlight, actual, warm, impossible sunlight, was streaming through the window, catching dust motes dancing in the air. My bedroom, but newer. The paint on the walls was fresher, the throw pillows on the chair were plumper. I scrambled out of bed and stared into the dresser mirror. The woman staring back was me, but not the me I'd known for the last year. The haunted, hollowed-out look was gone. There were no dark circles, no grief-carved lines around my mouth. I looked rested, younger. I snatched my phone from the nightstand, my hands shaking. The screen lit up. The date was October 12th, 10 years ago. No, it's not possible. I finally completely lost it. And then I heard it. A sound that punched all the air from my lungs, a sound I had replayed in my memory a million times until it had faded and worn thin. Giggles, tiny, bubbly, unrestrained giggles from down the hall. My feet moved without my permission. I stumbled into the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. And there he was, my son, my Leo. He wasn't a ghost, not a memory. He was small and solid and overwhelmingly real, his wild blonde hair sticking up in every direction as he chased our old tabby cat Marmalade with a piece of string. Leo? My voice was a choked whisper. He stopped and beamed at me, that gap-toothed smile that owned my entire soul. Mommy, Marmalade is being silly. I fell to my knees and pulled him into my arms, burying my face in his messy hair. He smelled of milk and sleep, and that unique, perfect scent that was just him. Tears streamed down my face, hot and real, soaking his superhero pajamas. He was warm, he was breathing. He squirmed in my arms, a real living 5-year-old boy. It wasn't a dream, it was a miracle. He wriggled free. Mommy, you're squishing me. It's my birthday party today. Can we have cake for breakfast? His birthday, his 5th birthday, exactly 1 year before the accident. The joy that flooded me was so fierce it was painful, but riding right alongside it was the icy, jagged memory of his loss, of the cold bridge and the colder guilt. I looked at his perfect, innocent face, and a vow formed in my heart, solid and unbreakable as diamond. I will not lose you again, and I will find out what really happened. The birthday party was a nauseatingly perfect slice of suburban life. Primary colored balloons bobbed in the breeze, a bouncy castle roared in the corner of our manicured lawn, and a swarm of 5-year-olds ran in circles, high on sugar and the sheer joy of existence. It was exactly as I remembered it, only this time, I saw it all through a filter of suspicion. Julian was in his element, the consummate host. He flipped burgers at the grill, a crisp white polo shirt stretched over his athletic frame, laughing with the other dads. Another beer, Tom? Don't mind if I do. He was charming, attentive, the picture of the perfect husband and father. He'd even remembered to buy the organic juice boxes Leo's friend with the allergies was allowed to have. And then there was Chloe. She bustled around, refilling chip bowls, a smear of frosting on her cheek, her smile never faltering. Alara, honey, don't you lift a finger. I've got this. She was playing the role of doting best friend to the hilt, but I wasn't watching the performance anymore. I was looking for the cracks. And then I saw it. Julian had his back to the party, talking to Chloe by the garage. Their heads were close together. It was a quick exchange, but I saw the look that passed between them. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't conspiratorial in an affair kind of way. It was tense. A flash of shared anxiety, a quick, sharp nod from Julian, and a tightening of Chloe's jaw. It was the exact same look I'd seen them exchange across my hospital bed a year from now. The look that said, stick to the story. My blood ran cold. From that moment on, I was a detective in my own life. All the little things I'd been too happy, too trusting, too in love to notice before now jumped out at me like they were highlighted in neon. Julian's work phone. A sleek black smartphone he always kept face down, separate from his personal one. Too many work emails, honey. It would drive you crazy, he'd said. Now it looked less like a convenience and more like a vault. Chloe's subtle conversational maneuvering. When one of the moms asked Julian about his new tech venture, Chloe had swooped in before he could answer. Oh, don't get him started on that boring stuff. Who wants more cake? Everyone laughed. I didn't. I had to be smart. My memories of the future were a weapon, but if I accused them now with no proof, they'd use my grief. The grief that hadn't even happened yet to paint me as crazy. They'd done it once, and they'd do it again. So I started to play a long, quiet game. I became the doting wife with a sudden, inexplicable interest in the mundane details of our life. A few days after the party, I picked up the mail. Tucked inside a magazine was a recall notice. Not for our car, but for a similar model from the same manufacturer. Brake failure. I left it on the kitchen island where he'd be sure to see it. That evening, he came in and tossed his keys into the bowl. He saw the notice. What's this? I came over, wiping my hands on a dish towel. Oh, I saw that and got a little spooked. Isn't that almost the same as our car? That's so scary. I watched his face. For a split second, a flash of pure, undiluted annoyance crossed his features. It was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a reassuring smile. Don't you worry about that. Our model is top of the line, perfectly safe, he said, patting my arm. He crumpled the notice and tossed it in the bin, but I'd seen it. Next, I went after the money. I knew, from the whispers and the eventual bankruptcy filings in the original timeline, that his company was a house of cards. Honey, I said one night, scrolling through vacation websites on my tablet. I was thinking, we never took a real trip after your last big project wrapped. That bonus must have been amazing. What about Hawaii for Christmas? He didn't look up from his laptop. We can't afford that, Alara. Oh, I said, feigning disappointment. I just thought with the way you've been talking up the company. He snapped the laptop shut. The market is volatile. We need to be conservative right now. It's boring financial stuff you wouldn't understand. Let's just drop it. His tone was sharp, defensive. He was hiding something. He was lying about everything. The final piece of the puzzle, for now, came a week later. I was tidying his home office, a place I rarely entered. Dusting his bookshelves, I purposefully knocked over a stack of old tech magazines. As I knelt to pick them up, my hand brushed against something taped to the underside of the bottom shelf. A key, not for the house. And behind a row of thick binders, I found the lock it belonged to. A small, fireproof safe I never knew existed. I didn't open it. I didn't need to yet. I just needed to know it was there. That and the burner phone I found tucked away in his gym bag later that day. I had no passwords, no keys, no concrete proof. But I had targets, and I had a year. In my past life, the one that ended on the bridge, the name of the mechanic who had inspected our wrecked car was burned into my brain. Miller's Auto. His report was the cornerstone of the case against me. No mechanical failure found. Accident consistent with driver error under adverse conditions. Miller. The man who had, with a few strokes of his pen, branded me a killer. This time, I wasn't waiting for an accident. I drove our pristine, uncrashed family SUV not to Miller's, but to a small, greasy, old-school garage on the other side of town. The owner, Sal, was a grumpy old bear of a man I'd found through deep-diving online forums for car enthusiasts. He was known for being brutally honest and having zero tolerance for corporate nonsense. "Car's practically new. What's it in for?" he grunted, not looking up from his crossword puzzle. I gave him my most convincing, anxious mom smile. "I know it sounds silly, but I keep hearing this tiny little squeak when I brake hard. My husband says it's nothing, but with a little one in the car, I'd rather be safe than sorry." Sal sighed, put down his paper, and grabbed a flashlight. "Pop the hood." I spent 2 hours in his dingy waiting room, flipping through ancient magazines and trying to keep my heart from beating out of my chest. Finally, he came back in, wiping his hands on an already black rag. His face was grim. "Ma'am, you weren't hearing things," he said, his voice low, "and you're lucky you brought it in." He led me out to the bay and pointed the beam of his flashlight at a part of the engine that meant nothing to me. "This here is your brake line. See this fitting?" He touched it with a grimy finger. "It's been tampered with, systematically. Someone's been loosening it just a fraction of an inch, then tightening it again, over and over, stripping the threads, weakening the seal. It's designed to hold up under normal driving, but you slam on the brakes on a wet road, this thing blows. All your brake fluid dumps out. Pedal goes straight to the floor." He looked me straight in the eye. "This ain't wear and tear. This is deliberate. Someone is trying to make sure this car fails, and they're trying to make it look like an accident when it does." I stood there under the flickering fluorescent lights of Sal's garage and felt the world tilt on its axis for the second time in my life. This was it. The proof. It wasn't just a lie. It was a murder plot. Sal's discovery lit a fire under me. I was done being subtle. I needed access to Julian's secrets, and I needed it now. That night, after he was asleep, I crept into his home office. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely function. I'd spent a small fortune in cash on a keylogger, a tiny USB device that looked like a wireless mouse receiver. I plugged it into the back of his desktop computer. It was the riskiest thing I'd ever done. For 3 days, I waited. Then, feigning a headache, I went to bed early and listened for the sound of his office door closing. I gave him an hour, then crept back to my own laptop. The keylogger had uploaded everything: passwords to his bank, to his email, and, most importantly, the 6-digit PIN for his burner phone. With trembling fingers, I retrieved the phone from his gym bag and punched in the code. It opened, and my world fell apart. It wasn't text to a lover, it was worse. It was a string of encrypted messages with Chloe, spreadsheets, and calendar reminders. And then, I found the documents. A life insurance policy for $5 million taken out on me, with a rider for an additional $2 million if the death included a minor dependent. Leo, the policy was dated 6 months ago. And then the bank statements from an account I never knew he had. A steady stream of money flowing out of his failing business into this secret account. And from there, a series of large six-figure payments to another account, an account belonging to Chloe. The breath left my body in a whoosh. It wasn't an affair. God, I wished it was something that simple, that mundane. This was so much colder. I needed to see her. I needed to see her lie to my face. I called Chloe the next morning. Hey, can we get coffee? I'm having a really rough time. We met at our usual spot. She slid into the booth opposite me, her face a mask of concern. What is it, Alara? You look like you've seen a ghost. Oh, you have no idea. I stirred my latte, letting the silence stretch. I had the most awful nightmare last night, I began, letting a tremor enter my voice. It was so real. I dreamt that you and Julian were lying to me about everything. I looked up, meeting her eyes, letting a single tear roll down my cheek. Her denial was immediate, practiced. Oh, honey, no. Why would you ever think that? We love you. Julian adores you. She reached across the table to pat my hand. Her touch felt like a spider crawling on my skin. I know, it's stupid. Head, I sniffled. In the dream, there was another car crash. It was just like, and you were both there. Chloe's comforting smile didn't waver, but her eyes did. Just for a second. And then she made the mistake I was waiting for, the one that sealed her fate. Honey, she said, her voice soft and condescending. You've been under so much stress lately. It's no wonder you couldn't handle the car on that wet road. I froze. My spoon clinked against the ceramic cup. That wet road. In my first life, in the real accident, the official report mentioned a light drizzle that had started just before the crash. But it was a minor detail. It was never in the news reports, never mentioned in the gossip. The only people who knew the road was slick that afternoon were me, the first responders, and the person who caused it. I looked at my best friend, the woman who had held my hand at my wedding, who was Leo's godmother, and I saw a monster. It all clicked into place. The payments. The secret business dealings. Chloe wasn't Julian's mistress. She was his business partner, his failing business, his mountain of debt. The insurance money wasn't for him to run away with a new lover. It was a corporate bailout funded with my life and the life of my son. We weren't people to them. We were a line item in a disgusting, murderous business plan. I pulled my hand back from hers. You're right, I said, my voice suddenly clear and steady. I have been under a lot of stress. I stood up, leaving my full latte on the table. Thanks for the coffee, Chloe. As I walked out of the cafe, I could feel her eyes on my back, her perfect mask of concern finally cracking into confusion. And, I hoped, a little bit of fear. The final week leading up to the anniversary, the day I was supposed to die, was the longest week of my life. The air in our house was thick with unspoken tension. Julian and Chloe were getting sloppy. They spoke in clipped, hushed tones on the phone whenever I entered a room, and I would catch Julian staring at me with a strange, calculating look in his eyes. He was checking on his investment. I, in turn, was a ghost in my own home, moving with a calm, methodical purpose that felt utterly alien. The terrified, grieving woman was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized, a strategist, an avenger. My grief was no longer a weakness, it was fuel, forged into a cold, hard weapon. My first stop was back to Sal's garage. I got a signed, notarized affidavit from him, detailing his findings about the tampered brake line. He was more than happy to provide it. You nailed a son of a bitch, he'd grumbled, pressing the papers into my hand. Next, I spent an entire night printing everything. The hidden bank statements, the multi-million-dollar life insurance policy, the encrypted messages between Julian and Chloe, the call logs from the burner phone. I compiled it all into a thick, damning portfolio. The next morning, I met with a lawyer. Not one of Julian's slick corporate buddies, but a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Miss Albright, whose firm specialized in high-stakes divorces and fraud. I laid the portfolio on her polished mahogany desk. I believe my husband is planning to kill me and my son, I said, my voice even. She listened for an hour without interruption, her expression unreadable. When I was finished, she simply nodded. I believe you, she said. She made a copy of the entire portfolio and sealed it in a large envelope. I'll hold this. You call me from a safe location this Friday, no later than 5 p.m. If I don't hear from you, this goes directly to the district attorney's office. I walked out of her office feeling like I could finally breathe. I had an army. Now for the final act. It was Thursday, the day before the accident. I found Julian in the living room, staring out the window. I put on my brightest, most carefree smile. Guess what? I chirped. I've decided to surprise Mom. I'm going to pack up Leo and drive down to see her first thing in the morning. We'll spend the whole weekend. I watched his face. For a single, unguarded moment, a wave of profound relief washed over him. His shoulders, which had been tense for weeks, visibly relaxed. He thought I was doing his dirty work for him. He thought I was driving my son, his son, willingly to our deaths. The route to my mother's house, of course, included that bridge. That's a great idea, honey, he said, his voice smooth as silk. A perfect surprise. Drive safe. Oh, I will, I said, my smile feeling like a sharp, painful thing. I'll be extra careful. That night, as I tucked Leo into bed, I held him a little tighter than usual. He was sleepy, mumbling about the bouncy castle at his party. He had no idea he was the subject of a war he couldn't see. I love you more than all the stars, my sweet boy, I whispered into his hair. Love you more than dinosaurs, he mumbled back, already drifting off to sleep. I stayed there watching him breathe until the sun began to rise on the day that was supposed to be our last. Friday morning came. I did not pack a bag. I did not put Leo in the car. I made pancakes. At 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. It was Julian's parents, looking confused. Elara, Julian said you were driving to your mother's this morning. Change of plans, I said cheerfully, ushering them in. I thought it was time we had a real family discussion. My own parents arrived 10 minutes later, followed by a very hesitant, very nervous-looking Chloe, whom I had also invited, telling her I really needed my best friend's support for a big family talk. I sat them all down in the living room. Julian, who had just come downstairs, looked like a cornered animal. Elara, what is all this? He demanded, his voice tight with forced bonhomie. I smiled sweetly and took a remote from the coffee table. Just clearing the air. I pressed a button. A small audio player I'd hidden on the bookshelf came to life. And Chloe's voice filled the silent room. Honey, the recording said, dripping with false sympathy. You've been under so much stress lately, it's no wonder you couldn't handle the car on that wet road. Chloe went white. Julian stared at her, his face a mask of fury. His parents looked from Chloe to me, utterly bewildered. That's funny, I said, my voice dangerously calm as I turned off the recording. Because the road conditions were never made public. How would you know about that, Chloe, unless you were there? Or perhaps you helped to plan it. Before anyone could speak, I dropped the portfolio on the coffee table. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. Or maybe it had something to do with this, I said, fanning out the top pages. The massive life insurance policy, Sal's affidavit about the tampered brakes, the bank statements showing the secret accounts and the payments from Julian to Chloe. I let them look. I let the silence stretch and curdle. I watched the dawning horror on the faces of our parents as they connected the dots. I watched the perfect facade of Julian and Chloe crumble into dust. It was Julian who broke first. He rounded on Chloe, his face purple with rage. You! This is your fault, your stupid, greedy ideas. My ideas? She shrieked, jumping to her feet. You were the one who couldn't keep his company from going under. You were begging me for a solution. They hurled accusations back and forth, their ugly, rotten truth spilling out all over our pristine beige carpet. Our parents sat in stunned, horrified silence, witnesses to the complete moral collapse of the people they thought they knew. And in the middle of the chaos, there was a sharp knock at the front door. I walked over and opened it. 2 uniformed police officers stood on the porch. Behind them, I could see Miss Albright's car parked at the curb. One of the officers looked past me at the screaming match in the living room. Ma'am, we received a call about a conspiracy to commit insurance fraud and murder. I stepped aside. I believe you're in the right place, officer, I said. They're just getting to the good part. Weeks later, the scandal was all over the news. The perfect suburban couple's murder plot was a media sensation, far juicier than the reckless mother story they'd run a lifetime ago. Julian and Chloe had turned on each other so completely that the DA's office barely had to do any work. They were both facing long, long prison sentences. I was packing the last of the boxes in our living room. The house had sold in a day. Everything in it felt tainted, haunted by the ghosts of lies. I was ready to leave it all behind. Leo ran into the room, clutching the old blue stegosaurus in his hand. It was no longer a symbol of grief, a relic of a lost life. It was just a toy, loved by a living, breathing little boy. "Are we going on an adventure, Mommy?" he asked, his eyes wide with excitement. I knelt down and smoothed his messy hair, a real, genuine smile spreading across my face. I was no longer a victim. I wasn't a ghost. I was a mother, a protector, a survivor. I had walked through hell and come back, not just for me, but for him. I had reclaimed not only his future, but my own. "We sure are, sweet boy," I said, my voice clear and strong. "We're going somewhere new, somewhere we can just be us.